Welcome back to Otaku no Video. As always, thank you very much for joining me. Where today I am reviewing Magical Girl Lyrical Nanoha, the first TV series. Now, Nanoha is a huge franchise in Japan, very, very popular, and never made much of a splash over here in the Western world for some strange reason. And this I'm reviewing today is the first Nanoha TV series, only 13 episodes long, came out in the early 2000s. Probably most remarkable for the fact that besides spawning this huge franchise, directed by the guy who directed Bakemonogatari and a little series called Puella Magi Madoka Magica, which you may be familiar with. So yes, this was a Magical Girl series he did well before Madoka Magica. Now, Nanoha itself is a spin-off from an adult visual novel, one of those sort of dating sim type things. Now, Nanoha was a very minor character with no sexual element to the adult visual novel. And so they decided to spin her off into this Magical Girl series. And that explains one of the really weird elements of Nanoha. The first couple of episodes spend a lot of time establishing Nanoha's family and how happy they all are, and how they have this very normal, reasonable life. And, you know, they go through sort of her siblings and parents and so forth. The reason is that in the adult visual novel world, they all had this very tragic experience and people died and so forth and so on. So, you know, the TV series is kind of establishing this is kind of the alternate universe where all these people did not have these tragic experiences and they can live this kind of normal, happy, you know, loving kind of life. So be prepared for that. That's the other weirdness is that the series, well, there are elements in the show. They spend a lot of time recapping what has happened already in the series, which is typical for shows that are aimed at a younger audience. Magical Girl series are typically aimed at young girls, and this is certainly no exception. In fact, most episodes begin with Nanoha herself recapping not just the story so far, but the basic premise of the series. So there's a bit of talking down to the audience there, which is appropriate for a series where your audience may not be following it closely every week and can't necessarily keep up with it. On the other hand, there's a lot of fan service. There's a lot of panty shots. There's at least one panty shot per episode, and there are a couple of sequences where we get to see Nanoha change her clothes into underwear and so forth. There's no nudity, and then like the transformation sequences. There's a lot of nudity in the transformation sequences, which I felt weird for this series. Aiming at young girls with all of this fan service. But that's why, because it's both going for that target audience of the young girls, but there are also going to be a lot of otaku who play the adult visual novel who are going to be tuning in to see what it is. And they want to try to capture them as well. So there's this kind of weird duality. Now, fortunately, there's no sexualization of any of the characters. So the fan service doesn't feel creepy in that way. It's just kind of there. And they can get away with that in Japan. Now, the animation overall is pretty basic. They have enough frames for each shot, but it's clearly they're being economical. And in the early 2000s was a period when anime budgets were typically pretty low. So this is certainly one of those series. It gets better in the action sequences, but there are relatively few of those. Every episode will build up to a pretty brief action sequence, a couple of shots, and that's about it. One interesting thing about Nanoha is that the magical effects for the Magical Girl stuff is rendered in CGI. Not the girl herself, but a lot of the effects, when she hits things, all that kind of stuff is in CGI, which was new for the time, and innovative. And it works very well because, magic should look kind of different and flashy, and CGI looks that way. Of course, we're all kind of used to that now, but it's nice seeing one of the first times it was ever used in that way, and the fact that it does integrate quite well. The direction overall, which is important for a director like this, mostly pretty work-a-day. I mean, it's kind of like this, where you have characters being shot sort of straight headshots and straight thing. Nothing particularly remarkable in the visual style, which if you're used to something like Madoka Magica, might be surprising, but that's just what it is. Although there are some sequences later on where it's directed in a very, it will look familiar if you're used to his works. So that's kind of interesting, the fact that he doesn't do much in terms of interesting direction in this, which is unfortunate. Now moving on to some of the characters. Nanoha herself is this pretty normal 13-year-old girl, living her life. She's pretty bland. as characters go. She's thrust into the situation, but she is active. And this is one problem I actually had with Madoka Magica, which I haven't finished yet. But that Madoka is, and most of the characters are pretty passive. Nanoha, even though things happen to her, she does pretty quickly start taking an active role in things, and especially by the end of the series, she is definitely doing things because she wants to and because she's decided to. There's very little in the series, especially in the second half, where she's being pushed around by circumstance. So that's awesome. I also like the fact that Nanoha's family is supportive, and there's some time spent where Nanoha goes to her family and later on with some plot twists and kind of explains things to them, and they're supportive of all this. And even when she has to go away for a while, that I didn't quite believe. The idea that a parent would say, "Okay, 13-year-old daughter, you're a magical girl. Go off and fight magical beasties." Really? Maybe they're humoring her, but she does disappear for a while. So it's just kind of odd. I didn't quite get that. There's another important element here, which is that Nanoha is trying to collect these jewel seeds, which are basically these dormant magical thingamabobs. And this rival magical girl appears, Fate Testarossa, and Fate has this relationship with her mother, Fate's mother, which no spoilers here, but it's definitely unpleasant. There are problems with it. And I give the show credit, and I give the staff credit for kind of going there. It's not sexual, by the way. But so whenever you're doing something like this, we're kind of trying to shock the audience with something that's kind of creepy. There's a question of how far you go with it. Nanoha doesn't go as far as they could in sort of showing this, but in my opinion, they didn't need to go quite as far as they did. There were several sequences where they could have pulled back, they could have not shown things, and it would have still been just as clear to the audience what was going on, but it wouldn't have been quite as traumatizing. I just felt like they were kind of going for shock value some of the time. Again, that's just me, and I'm not saying I was traumatized or that it was completely inappropriate, but it's one of those kind of watching it from a film buff's eyes and from a director's eyes. I was like, you didn't really need to go there, visually. You could have pulled back, and the viewer wouldn't have had to see that, but they would have known it had happened. It would still be in the mind, and of course, the mind can imagine things much more vividly than the screen can. So, yeah. Other than that, though, the plot is pretty generic. There's not much else going on here, other than just Nanoha collecting jewel seeds with her animal companion, and Fate collecting jewel seeds, and then it builds up to a big plot. There are some plot twists, but nothing shocking. And that actually leads to the one really big plot hole I had with Nanoha that I struggled with. Nanoha is collecting these jewel seeds. She's going out every night and trying to collect them. Another impressive thing, actually, quick side note, is that Nanoha has to take time out of her day and go off in the evenings to find these jewel seeds. And they show how her friends are like, "Hey, where have you been?" And her family's like, "Why are you coming home late?" and things like that. So that's realistic, hey. But anyway, so Nanoha's collecting these jewel seeds. Then this other magical girl, Fate, shows up, and she's collecting jewel seeds too. Now, as far as Nanoha knows, and as far as we've been told, the jewel seeds are just these dormant magical thingamabobs that eventually become, they essentially break out, and they become these massively powerful, massively dangerous magical things. So you got to find them and bind them and collect them before they get, they grow too big. So Fate shows up, and she's collecting jewel seeds too. And she's immediately treated like an antagonist, and that she has to be stopped. And the animal companion's like, "Oh no, what's she doing? We got to stop her. She can't do that." Why? If the jewel seeds need to be collected, who cares who's collecting them? As long as Fate's locking them away, great. And there's no indication that Fate's doing anything wrong with them. She's just collecting them. So I think it's one of those things where, and it turns out that there are some problems with what Fate's doing, Again, no spoilers, but there are some negative effects there. But again, it's one of those things where I think the staff knew it would be knew that was a bad thing, but never really explained to the audience why the characters would immediately think this was a problem. It seemed reasonable to me. So that is one unfortunate thing, and as far as I could tell, it was never really addressed in the series. So, oh well. Just one of those plot hole things. And again, this is a 13-episode anime series. There's not much room for plot or for a lot of explanations and things. It's a pretty brief thing. So I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining that the plot is generic. It's a Magical Girl series, and it fires off and does its thing. So as a Magical Girl series, if you like Magical Girl series, for example, Nanoha is certainly one of those. It has its flaws, but it executes on that premise and presents an entertaining series in that sense. Now I have heard from folks that the second season of Nanoha is superior to the first, and that things just kind of get better as the franchise moves on. I don't know quite why Nanoha deserved a second season and so forth and so on. There's nothing here that tells me, oh my gosh, we need to see more of this. So that was kind of the odd thing. So I'm not sure why this spawned a franchise, but apparently they came back for a second season and they were able to really push forward. Maybe it's just an indication of just how desperate the anime industry was back in the early 2000s. Something like this was considered above average. Oh well. So those are my thoughts on Nanoha. This season actually was released over here in America. I think it's the only bit of Nanoha that was licensed and released over here in America so far. So you can find that at places like Amazon and Right Stuff. Otherwise, you can check to see if it's streaming at streamsuki.com. If you want to talk about anime like Nanoha and other interesting works, please stop by my website at otakunovideo.net. And that's it for me and for Nanoha. So until next time, thanks for watching. With a lab coat?